There we go. So with that, welcome everybody to this Ashoka Huddle. My name is Brittany. I work on the US fellowship team at Ashoka, working with wonderful people like Janelle and Paula who are bringing forth change and justice to the world in creative, wonderful, impactful ways. And Ashoka Huddles are a tool and a platform that we're experimenting with. When I say we, I mean people like this. This is Annie. And other folks on our team have really just been trying to ask ourselves the question, how do we allow for fellows to share the wisdom and knowledge that they have, and connect people? Like, how do we get ourselves out of the way and let the knowledge and wisdom that is like hiding in the corners of this network come forward in a way that feels relevant and easy to access for people with busy lives. So this is part of an ongoing series of conversations actually, I'll share the link with you so you have that resource in the future of conversations that are being suggested and curated by Ashoka Fellows at like that lives in an online platform. And so our job is just to help convene the conversation. So really thrilled to do that today with Janelle and Paula, who have already in many informal conversations offered wisdom and insights to lots of different people, Ashoka Fellows and other innovators and organizers in their communities, and just have such an incredible, and I think, yeah, an incredible way of thinking about power and structures in which that power can be shared in a way that I think also like is married with the how-tos that in the world that we live in are often hard to imagine. And so in watching other people benefit from this knowledge, it's really exciting to invite them to host this conversation. And as always, these are meant to be conversations. So Paula and Janelle have graciously offered to set the stage and share some things that they've learned, but this really is meant to be a place where people can be asking questions and sharing things that they've learned along the way. So please consider, we hope that all of you consider yourselves as contributors to this conversation. So why don't we just take 1 minute to go around and just say your name and the organization you're coming from, and then also inviting you as we go and as Janelle and Paula launch into some of their sharings. The chat is a good way to sort of benchmark things, share questions, and I will point out as well that we'll be live transcribing the call and the link that I just shared in the chat. So you can also make comments there or questions, and we'll turn that into a share back afterward. So I will kick us off. My name is Brittany. I work on the Ashoka Fellowship team. And
hi, I'm Annie, and I work on the Ashoka Fellowship team.
So let's just do a go round.
You might need to call on people.
Karen.
Hi, I'm from Whole Child International, and this is such great timing because we just got a big infrastructure gift. So we are literally setting up the structure. We've just been through Globalizer, and so it's perfect timing. So thank you.
Wonderful, welcome. Adrian, you're next on my screen.
Okay. Hi, I'm Adrienne. I'm a staff attorney at the Community Development Project at the Urban Justice Center in New York City with Paula.
Welcome. I see Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I am newly the Director of Development at 596 Acres, which Paula founded, and we're in this time of institutional structural reimagining, with Paula not a staff member anymore and trying to move to a structure of three developers, directors working on a flat structure, and so we're learning as we do it.
Welcome, Rachel. And I have Charlie, Abigail, and Sue.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Little Kids Rock. We're a national organization that puts popular music in public schools, trains teachers to run popular music programs, and then donates all the instruments that they need to run their music programs in schools. About 2,000 schools around the country right now, and our organization is growing and also growing regionally. So we are kind of exploring different relationships between regional autonomy, national control, and expansion. So that's kind of the perspective with which I'm, here.
I'll also, Charlie, I'll share a link with you. There was a huddle with Wendy Kopp who compared her scaling in like a very franchise-based model
Right.
in the US with the global model that was much more decentralized and how that worked for her. So that might be a useful resource.
Cool. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I was on that call. It was amazing.
I was too, actually, and it was really, really good.
Yeah, it's really worth listening to.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, Abigail and Sue, welcome. Abigail, can you hear us? And or we can't hear you. You might need to, in the bottom left hand, there's a control for your video and audio. So there might be a problem here. Sue, can we hear you? Okay, so Abigail and Sue, if you can hear me, the chat is a way that you can introduce yourself if you're figuring out audio, and I'll keep my eyes peeled on email to see if there's anything we can help you troubleshoot. Whoa.
Very psychedelic.
Oh, Abigail's on. Abigail, if you unmute yourself, let's see.
Wow. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah. Okay, Abigail, I see you. I mean, I don't actually see you, but I am feeling like there's some audio things being sorted. But I will share that I think in our live notes we've got Abigail is joining us from Namati, which is also an Ashoka Fellow organization. And I'm excited to learn who Sue is.
Sue might be my wonderful coworker, it's possible, who is helping us develop our programs on training others on how to structure democratically.
And it's confirmed that she is indeed. Great. So that is us, and it's so great to have folks from to have fellows and people from teams of fellows in the conversation about how to decentralize this. I think even with Ashoka's model of like the fellow, it's in some ways flawed, and so really exciting to bring in teams of people that are exploring these questions, and this is important work.
Can I also just say we've got Scott here at Whole Child. So I'm the fellow, and Scott's been our director of outreach for many years here at Whole Child. So we're both listening in.
Yep. Amazing. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that round of introductions, Paula and Janelle, I'm so excited to hand the microphone over to you. Paula and Janelle have both prepared a little bit of are going to prime this conversation with some things, both their story and some insights that they've gained along the road, and we'll make sure that there's lots of time for candid conversation and questions. So use the chat in the meantime, follow along on the live notes. Paula and Janelle, so happy to welcome you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So I'm just gonna set the stage. I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about my trajectory and where we are. No, go back. So I started a little project that's this is good. This is like, we have to communicate completely. So I started a little project in 2011 while I was studying for the bar exam to keep myself busy and keep from losing my mind, to let folks mostly in Brooklyn know where vacant public land is that they could transform. And it started as an idea. It started as a little art project. And then I got together a little team of volunteers, and I was one of them. And we started putting signs on vacant lots around Brooklyn and kind of scratching the surface of, wait, why does the city own all of this land? And our little volunteer thing started meeting monthly, and we set up a Gmail address, and we created an advisory committee. And it all seemed very informal until we realized that we had absolutely hit a nerve, and people were clamoring for information. They were clamoring for guidance, and city agencies were kind of welcoming our intervention in their warehousing of land, which had in some cases been going on for 40 or 50 years. And agencies felt very stuck. Now you can go to the next slide. So then we actually decided, okay, there's a real need for this. Let's make an organization. And so we did that basically on a complete shoestring with no real committed funding. And we decided that I was the executive director, and my co-founder Eric, who built our website, was our technology director. And sometimes we got paid and sometimes we didn't, but we sort of started building an infrastructure from there, trying to figure out how to keep sharing as much of what we were learning and what we were doing with folks in the communities that were actually impacted by the city's warehousing of land, but also how to keep our services accessible. We were essentially running a hotline and operating a database and actually going out into communities and explaining pathways to land stewardship and pathways to land access. Then the Knight Foundation decided that what we were doing was cool, and they wanted to give us a grant, and they needed to know who to make the check out to. And it turned out we didn't have an answer for them. So we incorporated, because that was a way to give them someone to write the check out to. So we ended up with this advisory committee, kind of some employees, which were initially kind of grew out of our volunteer team, and then this board which was really a formality that we needed in order to be able to accept a check from the one foundation that has ever asked us to be our own organization. Now you can go to the next slide. That structure wasn't a great fit for what we were doing, and actually wasn't a great fit for the way we were raising money, most of it from the grassroots, most of it from people who were affected by the work that we were doing, and we're donating like $100 a year, and from different city council members that were contributing. And what we really needed was people on the ground to reach. We needed a lot of sort of different folks to be interacting with a lot of different people in neighborhoods. What we had was myself, I'm an attorney, and a technologist. Both of us were living kind of on borrowed time in a squatted house, so we had no rent that we had to pay personally, and that's kind of how we skidded along for a while. But that seems kind of ridiculous, and it just wasn't going to work for much longer. So I got a job teaching at a law school, which allowed us to take the limited funding we had and distribute it to other people who could then be out in the neighborhoods and be answering the hotline, and allowed me to continue to be a resource as an attorney for the organization. But the organization kept growing. I was nominated as an Ashoka Fellow in 2016. By that point, I'm a very active volunteer. I'm on the board, but I'd actually been teaching at Fordham Law School and was trying to figure out what my next move professionally was going to be. And in the present moment, although I am a fellow and I'm very involved with 596 Acres, and I'm actually the person that a lot of people who don't know the organization well want to talk to about all of these things. You can go to the next slide. I actually have a job somewhere else, and I will tell you about that in a second. 596 Acres is growing without me, as Rachel alluded to, and we're actually hiring our third director. And this is the structure that we have that we're evolving is that what we really need is these three prongs. We need a advocacy prong, a partnerships prong, and a development prong. And we need those three kind of circles of people to be working together. And Rachel's on the call with us now. You see her there on the slide. And I can go to the next slide. And I actually have a new job working at a nonprofit law firm that supports grassroots movements and grassroots organizations here in New York City, where we're working together with 596 Acres as one of our partners and clients. And we're building this new practice area in the context of an organization that's about 16 years old and is itself looking internally at its structure. In the last year, the Community Development Project has nearly doubled in its staff size without really changing its structure, and it's been relatively kind of management and staff, kind of traditional nonprofit focused. So this is the context for this conversation, is that I've been playing with institutional structures, setting up some things that seem to work to distribute power, but also trying to figure out what best practices are, because as in my professional trajectory, we really need them. And as I've been talking to other fellows, I've also been really noticing a theme of fellows feeling like they have to be the ones that do it all, or that what they're really doing is creating really unsustainable jobs for themselves. That isn't exactly where my path has taken me, but I feel like what we really need is a set of tools to help guide transformative organizations in organizing their internal power and then organizing themselves to be powerful in the worlds that they're trying to impact. And so for myself, I've been turning to a few resources, and one of those is Janelle Orsi's organization, the Sustainable Economies Law Center. I'm really happy that when actually another 2016 fellow asked me if I would lead this conversation, I kind of said, well, I'm a novice, but I know somebody, and she happens to be a fellow too. I wonder if she would lead this conversation. So Janelle has been an inspiration and a resource, and I think her clarity in describing how they have set up the Sustainable Economies Law Center from day one is kind of a guiding light for me, and I think for a lot of other people. So I'm going to let her talk about that, but also in the live notes, I also put in some other resources and other things that have been inspiring. I'm going to turn it over.
Right. Thank you, Paula. So I'll try to paint a picture of what it's like at Sustainable Economies Law Center, and I have to say we have a pretty atypical structure, but it's one that I really love, and I feel so lucky that I have ended up in an organization like this. And I think that's something probably a lot of organizational founders could relate to, is that you set out to do certain work in the world because you want to do that work. And sometimes starting an organization is a bit of an unforeseen side effect of doing that work. And for Sustainable Economies Law Center, for me, it started as a bit of a hobby with some friends. And it wasn't until funders got wind of what we were doing and tried to give us money that I had to really think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Now it's going to be a job. Am I going to be a boss? And what are all the responsibilities that come with this? And as a bit of an introvert and someone who likes a lot of quiet time, I was pretty resistant. Actually, I dragged my feet. But ultimately, we took the funding, and within a few months' time, ended up with 6 staff people. And sort of off the bat, and somewhat in the spirit of me not wanting to take full responsibility for an organization, I kind of approached my 5 new coworkers not as if that they had come to work for me and my vision, but as if we were going to basically be co-conspirators in a project together. And that set into motion kind of a culture that over the years has, evolved in and been tweaked over and over again. Sort of now we have 15 staff, but all staff have been sort of contributing to shaping the organization over, say, the last 5 years to where it is now. And somewhere along the way, we realized, I think we're really onto something, because for the most part, we all really like our structure. And it's not to say that it's perfect. And I don't want to be a goody two-shoes and say it's perfect. And in fact, there are, I think, regularly people are complaining about little things in the organization, but the beauty of it is that we have a really great system for hearing those complaints and proactively and really productively addressing them. And that is actually the force that causes our organization to evolve constantly. So yeah, it's kind of like everyone is responsible and no one is responsible at the same time. And in many ways, this is my dream job, and that I feel really happy, and I have the best of both worlds of having a lot of autonomy, but also having a team so that we can do great things. And so we call ourselves a worker self-directed nonprofit. There's various reasons why that might not be the best phrase, but for now, it's what we've been using. And I'm always trying to figure out how to define it. Here's today's version of the definition, which is that from the perspective of the organization, what is steering the organization is not necessarily a board of directors or a single leader or visionary. It's pretty much everybody throughout the organization through a lot of different processes of giving feedback and bringing ideas and proposals. And everyone is steering the organization. And then from the perspective of workers, it means that you can look around at your immediate work and projects and have a lot of influence and autonomy with regard to those. You can look at the environment of your workplace, the organization as a whole, and if you see room for improvement or if you have ideas, you can actually take action to implement them. But what makes all this work, because it sounds like it could be incredibly chaotic, is really a lot of thoughtful systems, culture that we've put in place. And so I'm going to describe those. But first I want to say that kind of early on, I had to ask myself, is this even right for a nonprofit organization? Because there's a lot of law around what nonprofits can and can't do. And I was a little worried, but ultimately, I guess, spoiler alert, what we've concluded after doing a lot of research and thinking and observing is that in many ways, this is the most appropriate structure for a nonprofit, to the extent that a nonprofit is really meant to be highly accountable to the community and highly transparent, and to be very effective and efficient with its charitable resources and advancing its mission. And so I guess the biggest thing that I've realized about nonprofit law is that most of what people would tell you is legally necessary or legally required is not. It's really a set of best practices, or just sort of basically certain expectations and customs that the nonprofit sector has adopted over many, many years, to the point where people think it's required. And it's really not. So the good news is there are actually very few strict legal requirements, but there's the underlying goals of the law of having a highly accountable organization, preventing corruption, and that kind of thing. But one of those legal requirements, hopefully you saw that, I'm going to do that again. There's the airplane with a board of directors. I mean, one of the legal requirements is to have a board of directors, and I draw them in an airplane because it's a kind of a flyover governance where especially volunteer boards can only meet every few months practically. And although the organization is legally required to operate under, usually the law says, the ultimate direction of the board, really what happens under the board is really flexible. And conventionally, organizations have installed hierarchies because of the practical limitations of being a flyover board, is that you can only really pay attention to a little bit. You can't really see so much what's happening on the ground. You can read reports with numbers, but the idea is a lot of boards just hire a CEO with the expectation that they're going to somehow control this system and make it all work really well. But the hierarchy is not required at all. And in fact, and then that brings up the question of, okay, here comes my next weird slide. Yeah, well, that brings up the question of what does that look like if it's not hierarchy? Does it mean that everybody's participating in every decision? And it's true that some organizations try to do this. And usually there's a lot of snarky comments about how the meetings feel and how much everybody hates meetings. And so I definitely don't recommend this as a solution. So I want to dispel the myth that this is the ultimate of the hierarchy. There's also a sense that, without hierarchy, there's just no structure whatsoever. And again, I do see organizations that have this, especially where there's a lot of like a history of relationships between the people. They kind of feel like they're just, they're all friends. It's going to work out just fine, and they don't need to adopt a formal structure. But I really don't recommend that. And in fact, there's a whole essay that Paula has shared with you all on the Google Doc about why this is not a great way to go. And the main reason is that even if you don't adopt a structure, natural power differences set in somewhat automatically, or I don't know, kind of organically, as a result of the fact that some people just have a strong sense of privilege and entitlement to really speak up and have things happen in their way. And it can become somewhat invisible, but eventually results in a lot of power differences. And so I call, the people who have a lot of, who tend to step up and take a lot of power, the tyranny of structurelessness Rex. I create these slides so that it will be very memorable in our minds. But yeah, so I do think structure is really important. And so ideally what we would be doing is creating structures that spread power, spread expertise, and spread decision-making throughout the organization. But in order to do that, you need a lot of structures, and you need to do it in a really organized and transparent way. And there are two really helpful models that where people have sort of sat down and thought through the whole system of how do you create a polycentric, meaning distributing power throughout the organization, creating many centers of power. How do you do that in an organized way? And what does it mean for all of the operations of an organization? So holacracy and sociocracy, you can look those up. My organization borrowed quite a bit from holacracy early on because I had taken a training and I really liked it. Some people are put off by how kind of technocratic and robot-like it can feel sometimes. People are like, wait, we're human beings and we have feelings, and holacracy feels kind of like machine-like sometimes. But sociocracy is a lot softer, and they're both really great. There's a lot I like about each one. So here's the organizational chart for Sustainable Economies Law Center. We have a lot of centers of power. I guess you could say we have about 25 or more circles where we break up the functions of the organization and our programs. It looks really bad, sorry, but just zooming in, we have 7 different circles just focused on various operational aspects of our work, like fundraising and communications. And on average, I would say most of our 15 staff are involved in about 6 circles each. And almost everyone is involved in something related to administration, operations, and everyone is involved in something related to programs. And so we don't have kind of an operational department that's completely separate from programs. And so people have a diversity of circles that they're in, and then within each circle, everybody has a set of roles that they fill. So, and one thing that's really important about those roles is that they can move around constantly. So nobody has a fixed job description. And this is a little bit subversive in comparison to most organizations, because having a fixed job description is the main way in which you can maintain power differentials and hierarchies. You can justify pay differentials. And when people's roles are changing constantly, not to the point of being chaotic, but every year people's roles change a little bit. It's hard to really sort of pinpoint, well, who's in charge and where does the power lie? And then each role that somebody has is accountable to a circle. So nobody's out there doing anything alone all by themselves without reporting back and getting feedback from their coworkers in one of those circles that they're in. And I guess, let me go back up. One thing I want to say about about being able to move roles around a lot is I think it creates a much more relaxed culture, in the sense that a lot of people end up in roles that aren't a good fit for them. And really what we do in that case is just bring a proposal to move them to a different role, bring someone else into that role. And so it creates a lot more job stability. So if someone's not perfectly suited for what they're doing, they don't need to be fired, and the organization doesn't need to suffer under their own struggles. You just constantly adapt. You're just constantly moving everybody into their sweet spot and sort of getting the organization into its sort of flow and a rhythm that works really well. Another thing, sort of, I guess maybe one thing I should have mentioned early on is when there's a lot of autonomy for individuals, I think a lot of the organization works because there's a lot of intrinsic motivation by staff to make it work. You need to create a culture and an environment that really inspires people to get up every day and carry out the mission of this organization. And so it's not just about creating formal structures and things you might write into bylaws. It's also just about kind of everything you do and the feeling it creates for people and what it sort of motivates them to do. And so I borrowed this phrase from a great company called Lumio, this ethos of upskilling, which is basically the idea that we always want to be growing individually in our careers, always learning and adding more to the organization. So an example is in Sustainable Economies Law Center, 4 of our staff are becoming lawyers without going to law school, which you can do in California and a handful of other states. And again, this helps to prevent the formation of hierarchies because, we're constantly basically we're unable to say that someone should have a lot more power than someone else based on their skills, or someone should have much higher pay based on skills, because we're always growing our skills. So then the question of, well, how do we even decide what it is we're going to do? A lot of people will immediately say, well, I don't think we can do consensus, under the assumption that consensus is the alternative. And I actually don't like consensus processes that much. And I've worked with a lot of organizations that use them. And basically I've realized that it's a little bit hard to have a culture where you expect that everything you do is going to somehow satisfy everyone and that you can all be in agreement about everything that happens. And in fact, in many ways, it stifles diversity and it stifles possibilities when you expect that you can somehow get to a solution that everyone's happy with. And so what we do is not consensus. You might call it peer-guided self-direction, which is the idea that individuals have a lot of autonomy to decide what they're going to do. Circles have a lot of autonomy to decide what they're going to do, with constant guidance from their peers and constant guidance from other circles. And really that comes in the form of feedback and transparency. So transparency is telling others what it is you are going to do or want to do, creating a process where you're going to gather feedback and hopefully incorporate some of that feedback, because it really does make things better. But ultimately, each individual, each circle has a lot of control over what they decide to do. And there's a process where the group can intervene, or an individual can intervene if they see a decision going in a particularly harmful direction. And so it's kind of like the last resort, is you can intervene when things go really off course, but otherwise it's sort of, we created a culture of just trying things and experimenting and trusting that we're going to take action sometimes and some people are not going to like it, but the benefit of that far outweighs the disadvantages of trying to get everybody on the same page about things. So I'm going to zoom through the rest of the slides a little bit because I definitely want to create room for conversation. A couple more things that makes it work. Extreme transparency. Really, we use a lot of cloud-based systems. Pretty much every conversation we've ever had in every circle is documented in this software called Asana. But all of the roles that people have in the organization are in here, all of the tasks or many of the tasks associated with those, the discussions we've had, the proposals we've passed, and the notes for the conversations. So there's, a lot of visibility as to what we do. Our meetings are highly structured, and I think that's really important, especially because there's just so much difference in when and how people speak up. And we mostly have meetings in the form of a circle where we're gathering feedback or asking questions in a circle. So it makes sure that everyone has a voice. And it's actually just much more relaxing way to be in a meeting. And there's not a lot of like people interrupting each other or doing a lot of back and forths. Equal pay. Now this one is a hard one to bring up because I think there are a lot of organizations where pay hierarchies are already in place, and it's almost like you can't even begin to imagine restructuring an organization to have equal pay. And I think we're lucky that we decided to do it from day one. We use a MIT living wage calculator to determine it. But I guess what I realized is if we're striving to have staff take somewhat equitable, or maybe not equal, but equitable control over the organization, and to take equal, equitable responsibility, then it's really like it's hard to justify anything but equal pay. And there's a sort of a self-reinforcing cycle that you create when you have equal power, equal responsibility, and equal pay. And we thought of a lot of, people have always said, is there a justification for having pay differentials? And when you look at a lot of conventional justifications for pay differentials, it ties so deeply to privilege, race privilege, class privilege, has to do with your educational attainment, the experiences you've had, so many things. And we just don't want to reproduce those power structures. But what we realize is people have different needs. And so people get different benefits. Like we provide childcare assistance and healthcare for children. And we try to take into account that some people do have differential needs. And I wish we did so more. But my coworkers actually love the equal pay thing so much that some of them even refused to have raises on the basis that their rent was going up. So anyways, it's a juicy topic. I think what really comes hand in hand with self-directed work is having a self-directed work schedule. So really flexible work hours and flexible time off. People basically choose themselves. We also just tried to adopt a culture of very open communication. We're all required to read this book, Difficult Conversations, or another similar book, just to really hone our communication skills. We do a lot of conflict resolution training, anti-oppression training. Our peer performance reviews, there's no like supervisors reviewing, doing performance reviews for people under them. It's 2 people reviewing 1 person. And so everybody reviews 2 people and gets reviewed by 2 people every 6 months. And it's a great process. But overall, I think that the effect is that every decision and everything we do has a lot of eyes on it. And I'm not talking about the eyes of a supervisor or a board necessarily. It's the eyes of peers. And I think that creates a lot of accountability. We have certain roles that are positioned to pay attention to the big picture. For example, we have a circle and an individual paying attention to the sum total of our policy advocacy campaigns, particularly to make sure we don't do too much as a 501c3. And then the board of directors is basically, its role is supervision and then intervention when they see things going wrong. Maybe not supervision, I guess we usually say oversight. We call them owls, our different directors, because owls have good hearing and eyesight, and each board member has a particular oversight role. So there's one owl that pays a lot of attention just to our finances and has a staff liaison that touches base with her regularly to talk through our finances. And then the idea is that each board member asks a lot of questions, gives a lot of feedback, and then brings to the attention of either staff or the board anytime they have confusion or concerns. And really, like going back to the law for a minute, the primary legal duties of boards of directors are to act in the best interest of the organization and to do so with the care of a prudent person. And so if the board decides that distributing all of the power to workers through a democratic and distributed self-governance process, if the board decides that's the most effective way to advance the mission of the organization, then that is a really, really prudent decision. And we even have, Nobel Prize winning economist who has come to the same conclusions by studying groups around the world and realizing things work out much better for everybody when you have distributed governance. And ultimately, I think, you can advance your mission much more effectively because every staff person is in a position to sort of sense the needs of the community and move things forward. You're more accountable, you have higher integrity, especially because of the high levels of transparency, and more stable and resilient. When there's staff turnover, there's not like, oh gosh, we need to go out and find some expert to fill their shoes. There's a lot of ways in which we just move roles around, and because of having shared responsibility in so many realms, people can easily move in and fill in for each other. And it really helps to overcome founder syndrome. I think if I were to leave the organization would do great things. There would be, there's always voices that would be missing when people leave and perspectives that are missing. But I feel like I could totally leave and things would be fine. Not that I'm ever going to leave because I'm so happy there, but in any case, from a legal perspective, these three things, if it is true that worker self-direction can actually better advance these three things, then really it's the IRS and it's the Attorney General's dream come true. It's almost like the best way to fulfill the goals of the law. I'm going to just stop right there. Actually, one more thing. I'll get back to that slide. So we want to support other organizations that are in the process of adopting more democratic structures. And so we're pulling together, this is hot off the press. Nobody announced it yet.
Not even me.
Yeah, we're about to announce it. But yeah, there's going to be a convening of a handful of organizations to basically form a community of practice and share ideas and to provide mutual support and just deepen our understanding of what democracy looks like in nonprofits. And if you're interested, email my coworker, Chris at the SELC.org, or me, if you didn't catch that. And then here are a few resources, which...
Where is it going to be?
What's that?
Where is it going to be, the convening?
In the San Francisco Bay Area, probably in Oakland.
Thank you for saying that. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Yeah, we have a listserv of people interested in worker self-directed nonprofits. And I'll try to make sure these are in the Google Doc if they're not already. Lastly, this is stuff we could discuss if we want. So, sorry, I think I talked way too long. I really didn't mean to, but I'll shut up now.
You said all the things. I see that there's some really good questions.
Yeah.
I don't know, Brittany, do you want to guide us through? And we're about to switch off the recording, right?
So I'm wondering if we might share any questions that people are okay with being public, like especially things that you don't mind sharing publicly that might be relevant to other organizations. So what I'd love to do is just open the floor for 3 questions before we dive into answers that could fit in that space, visit those, and then do a round of unrecorded questions. Does that sound like a helpful format to people?
Yeah, just to expose what we're thinking. We do want to have some time for confidential space where we can just talk amongst the folks that are on this call and maybe troubleshoot some things that are sticky and you wouldn't want your colleagues to hear about in a recorded conversation. But so that is why we'll turn off the camera. But if there's other questions that feel more like, hey, anyone would love to hear the answer to this, let's start with those.
So, quick question about skills. Like in an organization, I mean, there's certain things that aren't necessarily program focused. And even if you say, well, development is program focused, I totally buy that. You can have a cultural philanthropy within the entire organization and things like that. But what about things like
bookkeeping,
accounting, or things like that are just very specialized skills that help the organization run smoothly and don't necessarily interface with some of those other circles?
I guess in our organization, I'm pretty sure that. Go ahead.
Can we like bring in 2 or 3 questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then one that was shared that I thought might be just like, how do you move an organization from a consensus model to peer-guided self-direction when consensus might already be the default and might be, not optimal? Was one that was shared on the chat.
Any others?
I had a question about what if there's a role that nobody wants? Because if there are roles that someone wants, it seems like it would be easy to have folks move to them, but there are definitely things that no one in my organization wants to do. And it's like, how do you deal with those?
Window washing. So maybe I'll tackle Charlie's question from the perspective of 596 acres. So in the world where 596 is still really small, and the truth is we hire consultants all the time, and those consultants work for staff that are internally accountable, but they work for kind of, I like this idea of talking about them as circles. But so where there's really a skill that is not that nobody on staff has, but they need to develop, the way to develop it is to rely on people outside the organization, have them do it, and learn along with them. That's been something that's been working for the last few years at 596, and some of those people have joined the team. A lot of them haven't. For us, the big one is graphic design. None of us are designers, but if you look at our materials, they're always designed. And that's just something that we don't have in-house. We really need, and we fill in that gap always with partners and other folks.
In our organization, this kind of addresses both, I think, Adrian's and Charlie's question. There are certain roles that we rotate on a regular basis because we know they're somewhat thankless jobs, and it's, I think the truth is there are some people who will just step up and do whatever thankless job if they see it not getting done, and there are other people who will avoid it. We have to take into account people's personalities in that way. And so for roles like cleaning the office, literally is one of them. Every month we switch to a different office steward, as we call it. And another, we actually had a bookkeeper leave, and or they're in the process of leaving. And so what we've done is divide up their roles into, I guess, across about 5 different people. So one person was like, okay, I'll do payroll, I will do reimbursements, I will do time off tracking. And none of us really wanted to do those things. Each of the 5 of us took a little bit of a responsibility we don't really care to do. But there's just a strong sense of ownership by everyone in the organization, to the point where we know it's in our best interest individually to have a smoothly running organization. And people are just very appreciative also of the fact that everybody does a little bit of thankless work. Oh, but to the skills, yeah. We're going to train more coworkers on QuickBooks, things like that, so that we do have that spread around. As to the question of transitioning from consensus to peer guided self-direction, I don't know, but I think my one suggestion would be to use the meeting processes of Holacracy. Try it and see how that goes. Specifically the process for making a decision. Basically, a person brings a proposal, says, this is what I want us to do. There's multiple rounds of questions until questions are exhausted, multiple rounds of feedback until that's exhausted. The person then can take into account the questions and feedback. It's in their hands to adapt their own proposal with that feedback. And then we ask if there are any objections. And as I mentioned, objections are only on the basis that that the proposal will really harm the organization or take it backwards. And a little bit of harm is fine, and it's like the irreparable kind of harm that we want to avoid. So it's different. Things come out differently, and it's worth trying for a little while.
I have a question, if that's okay. So I'm wondering, we do not operate like this at all. And and I think there's huge benefit to this. I can see lots of benefits to a lot of this. I think I wonder, and there are elements of this that we are moving to. So more flexibility and less work hours and more autonomy. We actually are pretty autonomous, and we kind of do our own, that part not. But I wonder about efficiency. How much time are you spending training people on QuickBooks, and just in terms of the skills piece, and I think it's fine if it's teeny tiny, but if you're looking at a really big organization, you're looking at serious growth, like, how much time are you going to spend training everybody on QuickBooks? Does this only work for a smaller organization that doesn't have a plan to really grow in a really big way? I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I go back and forth in thinking whether or not this is efficient. Definitely, we do spend more time. Do we spend more time in meetings? I'm not sure. We might. We spend more time at least tracking what we do and being transparent about what we do. There's a lot of just information that we track and share. And then, yeah, training people on QuickBooks, you know, in certain cases, we may decide to just outsource that skill entirely. But what has turned out to happen is that this system, because there's so much autonomy and the power is spread throughout the organization, taking on new projects and carrying them out, that happens really efficiently because it doesn't have to go up some sort of chain of command and be approved at some high level before it can happen. And we also don't have to plan things out with incredible detail. We can kind of take steps forward and try things. And ultimately, our organization does so much. I can't even believe how much we do. It's just mind-blowing how many projects we have sort of in motion. And so that tells me there's something highly efficient. And then a coworker pointed out at some point she spends a lot of time in meetings, and she determined it was like 30% of her time. And so, yeah, so that definitely makes us reflect on how efficient it is.
But if the meetings are efficient, then that seems like time well spent. Right?
Meetings can be great. Yeah, absolutely. Meetings are not necessarily, I mean, I agree, Paul. I think meetings can be hugely efficient.
Hey, who was that talking? I'm having trouble following.
That was Karen.
Aaron. Friends, thanks for this first round of questions. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. So thanks for the people in the future who are also benefiting from the deep knowledge of Janelle and Paula and others on the call.